Hello everyone, my name is Yanis Jansha and I'm happy to welcome you to a new streaming event organized by Aksioma Institute for Contemporary Art Ljubljana. The framework is provided by Hyperemployment, Post-Work, Online Labor and Automation, a year-long program of activities co-curated by the contemporary art critic Domenico Quaranta and myself. Hyperemployment is a word borrowed from the media theorist Jan Bogost that describes the exhausting work of the technology user. In fact, today, no matter if we are unemployed, self-employed, or working at a regular full-time job, as technology users, we are always working. The program we have put together includes a group exhibition, a symposium, several solo exhibitions, 3 new productions, a performance, a lecture performance, a screening, and a series of online meetings with some of the protagonists of Hyperemployment. Now we're ready to wrap it up with a publication featuring works by Domenico Quaranta, Luciana Parisi, Silvio Russo, a conversation between Mediengruppe Bitnik and Felix Stalder, and works by all the artists involved in the program. The book is a co-publishing initiative between Aksioma and Nero Editions and is now available on this website. Today's streaming event is an encounter between 2, or better say 3, contributors to the reader, Felix Stalder and the Mediengruppe Bitnik duo. The discussions entitled Algoregimes will touch upon topics such as the invisibility of institutional processes, the functioning of infrastructures and logistics, and freedom and control in the data economy. Felix Stalder is a professor of digital cultures and network theory at Zurich University of the Arts and a cultural producer with groups such as NetTime, World Information Institute, and Technopolitics. He is the author of Digital Conditions, published by Polity Press in 2018. Mediengruppe Bitnik are contemporary artists working on and with the internet. Their practice spans from the digital to affect physical spaces, often intentionally applying the laws of control to challenge established structures and mechanisms. At the minute, Aksioma is presenting 2 of their latest projects, Decisions, and Flagged for Political Speech, in an intertwined display solo exhibition happening in parallel at the Aksioma project space in Ljubljana and at Delta Lab in Rijeka as part of the Dopolavoro flagship of the Rijeka 2020 European Capital of Culture project. These works conclude the year-long program Hyperemployment, Post-Work, Online Labor and Automation, and at the same time offers us food for thoughts for today's streaming event. Remember that during the conversation you can ask questions, the chat available on our website. Our guests will answer to some of them in the final part of the event. Carmen, Doma, Felix, welcome. Thanks for accepting our invitation. I leave you the stage.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi. Hi, and thank you, Janes. Hello, Doma and Carmen. What we want to talk today is about what we call algoregimes, which in a way is an almost impossible subject, because on the one hand, it is impossibly large. We have ever more instances where decision-making trees are at least semi-automated, where certain decisions in chains of decisions are taken by machines. It's hard to say where that topic begins and where it ends. It probably ends nowhere, and it probably has begun not just with the event of computers, but a long time before. And to make things even more complicated, most of the parts that make up these decision-making apparatuses, the data sources, the algorithms, but also the institutional processes in which they are embedded, are deliberately kept secret. The kind of theorist Frank Pasquale coined the term black box society for this phenomenon that is by no means only a technical one. So there are lots of different layers of blackness, so to speak, around this black box. So how can we say anything that is useful or that's interesting about that? And how can perhaps also aesthetic practices help us gain insight into such systems? And since this has no beginning and it has no end, we might as well jump right in the middle of it. And I thought we would begin with the work that Jannis already mentioned, that you are showing now at Aksioma, which is called Decisions, 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 in brackets, Postal Machine Decision, a work that is developed as we speak. Maybe before we talk about the work in specific that is now visible in Ljubljana, maybe talk a bit about the background, kind of what it builds upon, because one of the things that we always encounter in this kind of techno discourse, particularly the way it's coming from industry, is that it's all brand new. It has no precedents. Everything we know is no longer valid, and we enter into an era of unprecedented anything. And unprecedented, so don't claim to have any opinion about it, just follow us. But you quite deliberately chose to base your work or model your work or be inspired by a work by Ben Vautier that's already more than half a century old. Maybe let's start with that.
Thanks a lot, Felix, Jannis, all of the Aksioma team for having us. Ben Vautier was or has been really inspiring, or generally said we've been really inspired by mail art for quite some time, because it was maybe one of the first instances where artists tried to network or saw the mail networks as their playing field in a certain sense. And Ben Vautier's work is a very beautiful work, we think. He basically, what he did in 1965, he published in 1967 a work called The Postman's Choice, where he stuck together two postcards with the address side on each side. So he stuck the picture side together, and he addressed the postcard to two addresses. And this was the postman's choice, because, of course, the postman then got to kind of decide where the postcard would end up. And we think this work is really beautiful because it gives agency to somebody within a system in a way this person usually does not have agency. So the postman usually does not decide where the mail goes, but is kind of a delivery instance within this logistics systems around mail. And we kind of chose to take this work and redo it in 2020 because we saw so much changing within the logistics field. The logistics field has been a field or a kind of a practice or a set of practices and companies that has gone or has full-on accepted automation into their systems. So for years now, the logistics systems has tried to push out any human interaction and kind of get machines to automatically do everything. So today the mail is sent through barcodes, and what we now did is we have in illuminated letters, we have the three words, decisions, decisions, decisions. That's 27 letters.
So now, like you see, like this is our studio view, basically.
Yes.
Like an image from our studio in Berlin, where you see like the whole piece in one.
Yes. And we package these 27 letters in into 27 parcels and addressed each parcel both to Aksioma in Ljubljana and Drugomore in Rijeka. So each parcel now gets to bounce around in the mail system for a while before it gets delivered to either, well, some even have come back to Berlin, but we then resend them. So in the end, they'll end up either in Ljubljana or in Rijeka.
So the decision process here is kind of like based on the fact of how the parcel is being put on the layer belt. So which side is up decides kind of like the next destination where it's going. So, and at the same time, the parcel, like some of them are in Ljubljana and then get tracked for Rijeka and continue the journey through Zagreb to Rijeka. Some of them get back. Half of the parcels, so we sent like 27 parcels a month ago. Only 13 arrived so far. So the 14 are still on the way. We don't know where they are. Like the DHL logs is a total mess. You can't kind of like follow it anymore because information is missing, information is doubled, information disappears. So this kind of like performance of this live tracking is totally out of control at the moment. And we are basically waiting and hoping that something pops up somewhere and that we get like a sign of life.
Yes. So the images you just saw, at the moment, we have 7 parcels have arrived in Rijeka and 6 have arrived in Ljubljana. That's the score at the moment. And the work in the end will be named by the 2 signages that will be on the wall at the end of the exhibition time.
Yeah, what I think is interesting already in Ben Vautier's work, and particularly now that we have it in contrast with that, is often we think of these algorithmic, these machines taking away decision-making power from humans. But Vautier's work was exactly that. Already the humans in these machines, in these kind of institutional arrangements have no decision power anyway, right? So the jump from a human person to a machine might be not that big in terms of the institutional logic than what we often think of when we think of that suddenly machines can do a human's work. Because often what is done first is that a human is made to do a machine-like task. And then once the task is sufficiently machine-like, it can be automated more easily than as it was kind of a human task. But something else struck me when you mentioned kind of mail art as one of the first, or maybe the first art movement to really think of the network and the distribution network of the mail as its as the place of where the work is being done. It reminds me a bit. I was thinking that around the same time, so mid-60s, kind of phone phreaking was at its height, right? So people deciding, very different social group, I guess, deciding to realize that the phone network is a vast place that you can use it in totally different ways than what it was intended, and that it itself is a kind of a social machine. So I wonder how much of that attitude is not necessarily, specifically in this one work, decisions, but more generally in your approach to, to networking or to working on and about the internet.
it's definitely something we aspire to. I think this gaining a level of understanding towards networks that we can then use to intervene in them. I think the phone phreakers were very special in that many of them were blind and had really good hearing, and thus could kind of access a level within this very tonal, I mean, in those times, very, you know, the height of the tone and the ability to reproduce this tone was very important. I think they were really good at that, and I think for these. For this group of people especially, it was like for many male artists, it was about connecting within a network. So the network actually gave them the ability to meet people who were like-minded or interested in similar things, or and I think for us, in a way, it's similar in that we try to approach the networks we find as an environment in which to produce work, and try to understand as much as we can about the workings of the network, to be able to understand also its aesthetic abilities, or its, you know, its the moments where kind of beauty is produced in a way. And I think that the phone phreakers especially, I mean, Joy Bubbles, one of the most famous phone phreakers, who actually got a job at a telephone company to kind of debug or, you know, find the flaws within the networks, help them find the flaws within the networks, because he was so good at understanding them. He talked a lot about the beauty of these networks and kind of this the aesthetics. And
I mean, like, basically what they built were, like, illegally at that time, was audio chat rooms. So they had, like, you know, one phone number you could call in from everywhere from the world, you know, mostly through kind of like phone phreaking, but the goal was to chat to each other, you know, not to be alone, because you're blind and you're sitting like in your dark room or in your room and you can't really move, but just like to feel that experience. I mean, like, the beauty we have nowadays through the internet, that you just can connect, you know, and form kind of like groups of interest and stuff. Yeah, all those things were kind of like already thought, like, in, yeah, as you said, in the 60s. It's nothing new, but I mean, like, it's becoming reality now.
I mean, the mail art movement also, you know, being in the 60s at quite an intense moment of the Cold War, was one of the few movements that jumped relatively easily across the Iron Curtain, because mail was kind of, a particular artist's mail was kind of not seen as something to censor. So it created its own kind of geography that differed quite a bit from the geography of kind of the dominant art places in the West alone. So I think this is also quite an interesting kind of aspect of trying to understand how, you know, these networks overlay and undercut, but are disturbed by or react to kind of traditional, you know, political and economic institutions. And in a way, it kind of has a bit of a, you know, it stands for this, let's say, you know, a bit of utopian view of the network as a space of freedom, as a space of, you know, as Thomas said, to be able to connect to people that you would otherwise never have a chance to interact with. And so that's still there, but obviously overlaid with kind of a lot of other actors that use the networking space for their own quite different agendas. That's a bit.
And I think what we. Sorry.
Go on.
I just wanted to say, I think that's one of the differences, or I think what we're seeing is that technologies in general, I think, were always accompanied by very enthusiastic hobbyists who try to find out how things work. You had that time in TV, in radio especially, where, like amateurs would play around and, find new things to do with the technologies next to what was being done commercially or, in a more general public. And this is something, which for us always poses questions. We kind of feel this is becoming harder because technologies are becoming so complex or kind of stacked on top of each other, and it's kind of hard to playfully engage. But I think this is something that is really close to our heart, because we really believe that there is freedom there somewhere to be gained.
We set this kind of our conversation today under the topic of algoregimes. That is a topic that I've been working under for a while now, and together with Konrad Becker at the World Information Institute, we've done a number of events, and we are trying to look at this as often when we talk critically about algorithms, we think of them or talk of them in terms of, whether they're correct or whether they have a bias or whether they are distorting or racist or, all other kinds of ways, which of course are, important subjects, no question. But we decided to look at this more from the point of view of these are kind of institutional, arrangements. And the same way that we really ask whether the electricity system is correct or not. It just creates its own reality, right? It creates its own way of organizing the world with its all kinds of artifacts and problems that are in there, but they're just reality. They're just real, and there are systems of governance, system of organizing, systems of distributing, chances and opportunities, both good and bad. But they're also, I think, systems that are not. When we talk about an algorithm or an algorithmic system or a black box for that matter, we often think of these as fairly monolithic systems. And but they're actually systems that are layered on top of each other, and that have therefore lots of openings, right? For example, when we think of the logistics network of DHL, we don't really, think of that as something that's particularly accessible to us because this is DHL, it's proprietary. I don't see anything, but it's actually a lot of layers on top of one another. And so one of the things that you are trying is to explore, these different layers, right, in these systems. So maybe you can say something about these, kind of what that does, to think of a layer rather of a system rather as a monolithic block, as a set of layers that might have very different, logics between them.
Mm-hmm. For us, the layers are always connected with the hope of that there is friction, where the systems meet, that they're not entirely compatible, that there's kind of a way in or a way to kind of, through the friction, through glitches, understand how they work. Because many times the errors actually produce a lot of knowledge around the system. You suddenly realize, that's how it's, meant to be working. So these errors actually produce a lot of valuable information for us. What we are seeing is that, of course, I think the aim of these systems, especially when they try to be monolithic black boxes, even if they're layered, is they try to become seamless. So they work on kind of pushing out these frictions. And I think that's something that for me was really interesting in what you did around Algoregimes, is try to kind of find different ways of looking and kind of seeing how these systems evolved. I mean, many times they don't stand still either. You know, they keep changing, they keep evolving, they integrate new parts. And I think this approach you have of kind of taking a step back and looking at it as if it were, I don't know, a foreign plant, where you try to understand, you know, how does it grow? What does it do if I, you know, put it under more light or whatever. I think that's really interesting. I mean, you've been doing this for a long time, so I'm also wondering, you know, do you think this is getting harder, as we sometimes really have, you know, as we kind of fear that it's getting harder to kind of see what's going on? I mean, like, as in kind of understand what's going on? Or do you think that that's, you know, maybe it comes also in waves or in, you know.
Maybe that's just like the moment for me to intervene before we go back to Felix, is that I need to say that there's a chat where you can pose questions. So there are already some people there, and you will also get like some reference links, like Felix's talk series on Algoregimes. All the videos are there in the chat, and connect.
I think there are really two questions there. One is kind of is it getting harder? And I think it's really hard to say. I think it's getting different, most of all. It's certainly getting harder on a technical level. I mean, the amount of very specialized technical knowledge that you need is growing, because these technologies are getting more complex. Amount of, kind of server-side complex data analytics technologies is growing too. So on that level, and the interfaces are more opaque. They are cleaner, they are slicker. They push, as you said, this notion of seamlessness, which is really an ideology, because these things are not seamless at all. But it's always seamless means you cannot intervene. It just flows. And that's really not the case. But technically, these things are harder, and you are actively discouraged from kind of thinking about ways of intervening beyond, a predetermined menu of choices. On the other hand, I also think it's getting easier, because these systems are so open. They take input from so many different layers that they really have an excess of possibilities in them. I mean, there's been a lot of discussions of whether Russia or whoever hacked Facebook during the 2016 election, or whether they just used Facebook the way it was intended to be used. Right? They had ads and created accounts and did everything that was, that was supposed to do. There was no magic, technical hack in there. There was just using the systems. And I think any complex system And it's a kind of a classic hacker approach. Any complex system has an excess of possibilities in them. But I think the way you can access these possibilities, these excess possibilities, has changed quite a bit. It's perhaps easier in the sense that it's, you can buy quite sophisticated machine intelligence as a commodity service through Amazon or Google or whatnot. You don't need to go into terribly complex programming. So I think it's both. It's more difficult because it's slicker, and it's easier because it has more openings. And it has these different, these layers. Each of these layers has different openings. And sometimes you can enter one layer to affect the other one, right? That is not open, but the next layer to it. And maybe this notion of layers is a good way to, talk a bit about the second work that is currently in display in Rijeka, flagged for political speech, because there you can really see how different elements of the network or of this network system and these algorithmic regimes build upon one another, and the types of openings that creates for intervening. So maybe you can talk a bit about that before we move on.
Flagged for political speech is a work we're showing at the moment in Rijeka, and which will be shown in Aksioma as well, but in January. And it's a work where we kind of wanted to look into algorithms as gatekeepers, maybe to kind of, open the field. So especially in terms of algorithmic assessment of social media profiles, this social media data is automatically used in gatekeeping functions. For example, when you enter the United States, you have to hand in your social media handles, or you're asked to hand in your social media handles.
And it's not sure, like, is it better to hand it in or not? You're kind of like in this strange situation.
Yeah, maybe as a young person, you won't get away with not, assumingly not having social media handles. And we concretely looked at this in hiring. So when you apply for jobs, people or the HR departments today many times use algorithms to look at your social media, your public social media profiles. So this is not about getting your logins, or this is not information that is hidden. It's just connected to your name, to your identity, and it's online. And there are many companies offering services around this. We used an algorithm by a company called Feritli. We looked at many of the companies offering services, and we actually came away with kind of the feeling that they were all using the same algorithm, which we can't prove this, but it was just this kind of notion we got from.
You had different interfaces
from the results,
like different target groups, like like highly qualified jobs. Then you have this website. Then you have one for workers, which is another website. But the product they are selling are most of the times what we saw is the same.
Yeah. And these algorithms are based on, so they look at up to 7 years of social media posts automatically, which they look for on like one part is they do a risk analysis. This is about telling companies how dangerous the new hire is for their company. You know, does this person use bad language online? Does this person post stuff that could be bad for the company's reputation? That kind of thing. They also use the 5-dimension psychology kind of assessment of feelings to tell the company what the person who posted stuff was feeling. Like in this example, for example, this post by Viktor Orban was flagged for self-harm, which is actually, I mean, we think it's really hilarious. But there you go. And we needed a data set to run through these algorithms. So we decided on using the social media profiles of the 27 leaders of the 27 European states. So we used either the Prime Minister or the Minister, President, whatever the person's called, the person that has executive power in each country. And for each of them, we produced a sweatshirt with their flagged posts and their sentiments, their risks and analysis. And you can now in Rijeka, in the show, you can kind of compare how they perform in social media space for these standard algorithms.
And what I really like about, this work and find really problematic about the underlying service is that we are two totally conflicting demands. On the one hand, there's the demand for authenticity on the network, where you have to present yourself as a quirky person. And on the other hand, there is the demand of the corporate world to present yourself as this, totally self-composed, slick, no edge, no rough edges type of personality. And I really wonder what that does in the long term to people when they have to conform to such conflicting demands all the time.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and I think in the data set we now chose to use, the funny thing is that about half the politicians are totally corporate compatible in that they post like nothing that is edgy because they're politicians, right? So they kind of have this very composed image, and then you have the other half who just post stuff and they get flagged for all kinds of for showing alcohol, for kind of, and I think this is this kind of makes the work funny, but the underlying problem here, of course, is this question of how do you can't, these social media profiles for many people they know they're public, but they have also a very private function in that you share stuff with your friends or with your peers or with your, your social group. Even though it may be larger, you may not know all these people, but you still have your own online persona is not focused on an HR performance, as you would when presenting yourself for a job, and this is kind of a question of what do we do with this conflict? And I think that the work for us was an attempt to kind of just map this, just kind of see that it's there and try to find a way of looking at what's there, what reality this produces, and kind of what this means, this gatekeeping function on top of social media profiles kind of means for people.
Yeah, and also like the question of kind of like, algorithmic decision making again, like, how is the algorithm working? What is it seeing? And the nice thing is, just like by visualizing this, you can walk through the exhibition, you can really feel what the algorithm is and what it doesn't like. And it's just like, things which are totally not bad, but like, let's say, a funeral or something is flagged as negative because there's a lot of black things, or there's stuff like that, where or like for a lot of like European politicians, like the Holocaust is a thing, and they go to events and stuff which discuss those things, and as soon as the Holocaust, the Second World War, is mentioned in a tweet, is flagged as political speech or flagged as bad. And it produces kind of like a strange reality. It's clear it is like within the political realm, but is it really bad to speak about? I wouldn't say that. So yeah. So, and also like we didn't only look like in those algorithms, but also like found other strange examples of where like this algorithmic decision making is already part of this hiring processes. One of the things is, for example, that when you apply for a tech job nowadays, it's totally clear that because they will get, most of the times, like they get so many applications, that they need to go through the pile of people, that the first step is just like by analyzing keywords in your text, like in your letter you send. And hackers already found out that there are tricks to circumvent that algorithm, which kind of like rates you to keywords, is by, copying the original job offer text as a watermark into your PDF, so it's not visible for the people who are reading, but the machine sees it and kind of like tags all the keywords as right and used. So like from that process, the pile goes down, and you enter maybe the more like kind of like sophisticated process of choice.
I mean, one of the perhaps funniest things about coming out of that work, I find this notion that both kind of run-of-the-mill type of job vetting companies and quite expensive ones are using the same algorithm, right? So the price is an element of the belief system that it creates. So you get this, super intelligent, high executive, whatever algorithm. So you pay a lot, and so you think this is kind of state of the art, but it's just the same thing as as the other one, just cheaper packaged, which I find really it's kind of funny, and but it also points to another kind of problematic element of these algorithmic systems, that they are that they are full of biases. They have very strange ways of looking at the world. I mean, that's what comes out by looking at these profiles that you dug out or that you created. And now there's this one set of biases, one set of weird, practices is being normalized across the board, right? And that's in a way usually thought of as quite problematic, right? Because you have this, if you won't make it anywhere, you make it nowhere, because you always will end up on the kind of bottom of the pile. But I wonder to what degree, I mean, this goes beyond your work, but how you see that. I mean, when we talk about algorithms like this, there's always a danger of thinking, oh, now it's getting worse, and it used to be much better. right? So it's this kind of weird nostalgia in it. And so I'm quite interested, because I know you're not coming from that point of view. So how how you see that?
I mean, like, for me, it's always both. There is always a chance in those things, and it wasn't better before. Just like I can speak from my own experience of being kind of like, growing up as a migrant kid in Switzerland, as a foreigner with a strange name, where whenever kind of like I tried to apply for a job, sometimes I would just get back the letter without it being opened, just like because they didn't want to hire a foreigner. So for me, the hope is that the algorithm is less biased than the society is, which, kind of like, and there is something. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I don't think, there was bias before, and that algorithms don't solve that, and they probably don't make it worse. It's just a different kind of bias, maybe, or a different set of biases. But what I do wonder about is about kind of the where do these become visible? The problem with this algorithm is that the way we used it, for every profile, you kind of get to see which posts were flagged and why this person, how this person was rated by the algorithm. And you can compare the 27 profiles, and you can kind of, decide, think it's funny, decide for yourself whether you agree with this algorithm's view. But usually you don't actually get to criticize the algorithm because it's in a black box. So you don't actually get to, that's the thing. I think that the hiring process in that way is special, because also before, everyone kind of encountered this one, HR person with the same bias, but they all encountered this person by themselves. And I think it's really important to keep organizing against, corrupt people in companies, but also against algorithms in the same way of kind of talking about, why are certain people, why is it harder for certain people to be included in systems? What I'm a bit afraid of is that the algorithms are, because they are unknown entities or not as known entities to us, maybe it's easier to just say, well, what was it in that sketch in Little Britain? Computer says no, this kind of, oh, sorry, it wasn't me, I didn't decide, it was the algorithm. I'm really sorry, I can't do anything. I don't know why the algorithm decided that way. And this is being used, in kind of mortgages, in, credit decisions. More and more these data sets are being used to kind of rate people. And I wonder whether, we're totally prepared for that as a society, because I think in many other areas we've kind of fought for compliance, or we've been fighting for kind of a certain openness or against these biases. And that's kind of, I don't think it's, I'm definitely not nostalgic for a better time, not at all. But I just feel that we have to kind of change the way in which we kind of deal. It's just a different system to deal with.
Mm-hmm. So it has a lot to do about kind of like this ambiguity
yes.
in data of kind of like not having like a right or a wrong, but it's somewhere the truth or the thing is somewhere in between. So maybe a question also to you, Felix. Where are we going? What are you working on? How do you feel about it?
I think Carmen, I think, already hinted at that, right? I think the task is to find a language and then give political, meaning to that language that can address different types of, structural discrimination. I think it has, taken a long time and a lot of effort to move, say, the discourse of discrimination, be that gender discrimination or racial discrimination, away from individual acts towards kind of institutional structures, right? And I think the same thing we have here. These are not individual acts where you can blame anyone of bad faith or evil character, but these are really institutional systems that just automatically do certain things, prefer certain views, discard certain others, but they function differently, right? And so we have to find a language for that, and then find ways to act on that language. And for me, because you mentioned the term ambiguity, I think one of the things that are most damaging in a way, or most problematic, is that sleight of hand that often comes when there's a movement from a numerical precision, right? Your score has 25 decimal points, so it's super precise, towards kind of a social precision, right? So to saying it's absolutely unclear what that score means and whether that numerical precision relates to anything other than its own statistical artifacts, right? So how do we develop a language that can recognize that they are not just right and wrong, but that they are really irredeemably different, equally justified interpretations of the data, and that we then need to negotiate what that data means, rather than just wait for the number to come out and then say, oh, 3 is obviously larger than 2, so who can argue against that? But that, I think, needs an aesthetic, and needs a language, and it needs and then it needs obviously a political subject. But even before that subject can be created or can emerge, I think we really need an aesthetic to make that visible, and not be stuck in this, the computer says no situation. I think this is a bit where we at, and where also kind of artistic work that can deal with ambiguity and can deal with the conflicting meanings that are equally valid and cannot be simply decided towards one or the other, but have to be lived with, that there's not one right answer. And I think this is what we also need to come up with or develop towards these machine systems, who always talk in the opposite language. They talk in the language of precision, of objectivity, of intersubjectivity or impersonality, and they are none of that, right? They are neither objective, nor are they impersonal, nor are they unambiguous. And we need to be able to formulate that and make that visible. And I think part of the work on political profiles is exactly that it gives you a sense of how ambiguous these scores are. What are they based on? What are the criteria? How do they come from taking a funeral image to say this is somebody with mental health issues for depression, and to get an understanding of that, I think is really helpful as a first step towards finding a new way of dealing with these kind of institutionalized and normalized and hidden biases that we are encountering now.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, because sometimes I think that this is really really important point. This ambiguity is we're also really hopeful that there is kind of agency or freedom to be found there, you know, when we kind of embrace
But there
this
is. Come on,
and kind of that it gives us a different way of engaging with these systems and not just the algorithmic ones, for that matter, any institutionalized systems that kind of take on these functions.
I mean, like I'm super happy also, like, you know, to at the moment just like to collect small acts of interference, you know, mostly by kids who are trying to play with those things, misuse those things, and I mean, like there was like this thing with the school kids in Wuhan during the first lockdown, where they got pushed to stay at home, and you know they had an app which they all knew it's a surveillance app. You know, it's like kind of like, you know, you will have the state in your home when you install it, will track you, everything. So the kids came up with a super simple solution to kind of like disable this whole system, is just like by downrating it in the mobile apps they had.
In the store where you install it.
in the Google Play Store, on Apple, in the Chinese stores, and those stores work like this, that they immediately kick you out if you fall below a rate of 1 point. And then it's still Google and it's Apple and it's all these strange companies, you know, where you can call them to say, hey, this is wrong information. So they asked like all other pupils and kids in the area to downrate that app so it would be kicked out of the app store, and they made it, you know. And it was just like such a beautiful small interaction with this thing, and the whole thing was stalled, you know, and debate started on, you know, how should the software look like, should it be a surveillance tool or not. But I mean, like there is potential for this discourse, so I'm super happy to see those things, you know, happening. Have a young generation, which is, you know.
Maybe that's a good moment to hand over to Neja to see what happened in the chat. Neja?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Thank you, Felix. Thank you also to all of you at home posting your comments and questions in the chat. We have 3 questions for you today. The first one is by Waffel, and they are asking Mediengruppe Bitnik. They're saying postal machine decision is based on the work from 1965. How did you work on the version to update it for 2020, where the concept or the question is basically the same, but the system you're investigating is not?
We spent thanks, a really good question. We spent a long time looking at logistic systems. We actually did some earlier works around not around logistic systems, but using logistic systems, where I think we kind of realized that they were changing so much. So we did a work called Delivery for Mr Assange in 2013, where we sent a parcel to Julian Assange at the Ecuadorian embassy in London with a camera inside, where we kind of got this really interesting inside view of the delivery systems, of kind of the hubs where the parcel went through. And we did a work called Random Darknet Chopper, where we ordered goods from the darknet markets and had them delivered directly to the gallery space, an exhibition space in St. Gallen in Switzerland.
All through software bot.
Yes, through a software bot. Yeah, right. Random. Yeah. through the darknet chopper. And in both cases, we became really interested at looking at these delivery kind of or logistic systems. We then spent a lot of time everywhere we traveled looking at ports and airports and kind of trying to understand how this all worked together, you know, where were the goods coming in. We also spent a long time studying the what you as a customer get to look at when somebody posts something to you through DHL or UPS or whatever other service, and you get the notifications, and try to understand how much this was actually linked to what the parcel was really doing. This is something we are heavily confronted with now in this work, because it has nothing to do with what the parcel is actually doing. So there's kind of a performative level online where the delivery services perform the delivery for you, and when the parcel gets stuck, they actually have these standard things that they say to you so that you don't realize that they've actually lost your parcel. And I think this all led us to kind of looking at this Maillard piece and kind of wondering what would happen today. You know, would this work? Would we see how these parcels would bounce? Which we do up to a certain degree, which Ben Vautier had no way of knowing, which is, I think, something that we today, where we today have much more insight into the system. I hope this answers the question.
Yeah, thank you, Carmen. That's very interesting. Our second question is also about the postal machine decision. It's by Paul, and he's asking the Bitniks, in your interview for the Hyperemployment book, you said that in your work Opera Calling, you learned about things you didn't originally even try to question. With postal machine decision leaving an even larger part of the work out of control, what were some of your insights or findings there? Have you also answered some of the questions you didn't even think you had?
I'm really bad at those things.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think with, just to illustrate quickly with opera calling, I think one of the big things we realized, which we knew nothing about before we started the work. So opera calling was basically, we bugged the Zurich Opera and took their audio, their live feed during their performances, and actually let people listen in live to the Zurich Opera remotely from their home through the telephone network. So every time the opera played, we would call people in the Zurich area and play them or allow them to listen into the opera remotely. That was kind of the setup for the work. What we encountered very quickly there was a very, very harsh kind of reaction from the opera. And this was partly due to the fact that they had a really, really big problem at the time with people entering the opera, the Zurich Opera, and filming whole performances and selling bootlegs of the performance online. So they were really, really paranoid about people kind of using their feeds, which we didn't know about because we'd never been to the opera before. We were just, you know, very much outsiders. And so this led to some confusion about what we were actually doing, and in terms of technology, you know, no, we're not recording this. No, we don't also record the image. We're not selling bootlegs. You know, this kind of where you suddenly start talking about things that you never thought you would be talking about. And I think here with the postal machine decision work, for me, it's been very striking how many of the parcels we've seen actually have very personal touches to them. So you actually see within this whole machinic or automated system around small parcels, you actually see that many of these parcels are being handled by people who then kind of take away one of the two labels, or they make this decision as to where the parcel will be going. They write comments.
They paint on them. They make like signs like, "Hey, we're going this direction."
Or they do little arrows, or they cross out the barcodes, and they're actually very beautiful artifacts in a way. And I think this for me was very unexpected, because we kind of imagined this very very slick kind of system we were entering, and what we get back as feedback is actually I don't know, this level of very lovingly treating or handling these very annoying parcels which have two addresses. Why do they have two addresses? Everyone's like, why do they have two addresses? This is wrong. This and this is kind of, I think this is something that many times we feel that when we come up with ideas, we really have to do them, because you can't kind of imagine what exactly will happen. And we, at least for us, it's always really, we're really happy about these happenings, or things that kind of happen that are unexpected.
I mean, this in a way points to the kind of to this ideology we were talking about before of frictionlessness, right? And this idea where everything is automated, and this is this super efficient, fully automated system, when there is a lot of handwork in it, a lot of human labor in it. And it reminds me of a very beautiful blog, a collection. I think it's called The Hands of Google Books. And it's, you would think Google is totally automating its book scanning operations, because this is Google. Google automates everything. And how difficult can it be to, turn a page of a book? And it turns out it's extremely difficult, and it's really hard to automate without ripping endless pages of books, because the variations of books is so high. So there are a lot of people actually physically turning the books, and occasionally, their fingers are on the page while it's being scanned. And, one of the things you can see, it's almost always, dark fingers. So it's always, black and brown, and fingers that points to this, also how labor is organized. But there's incredibly labor intensive, human labor intensive processes. And I think this notion of full automation is almost always ideological. And on your package, you can see that. You can see that the amounts of humans involved, and the need for humans to be involved, and how far full automation is from being really full.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before we jump onto the last question, Fernando just asked in the chat, how do you think the agency shifts when large corporations share their code and algorithms as open source and people start to dismantle it? When there is a reliance on the hackers and enthusiasts in a society to review those systems?
Maybe I think it's wrong to think of open source as hackers and enthusiasts. I mean, obviously, there's the edge of that, and who's a hacker, right? But I mean, this figure of this kind of semi-shady individual. I think open source opens or allows for the possibility to scrutinize the code, but unless you have, as a society, institutions and mechanisms to make that work, you cannot rely on individuals to do that on a systematic basis. I mean, occasionally it's being done and somebody finds something, but it's more interesting to think of it as an opportunity for us or for society to develop new ways of doing that. And sometimes this happens. The EU sometimes gives out bounties to find bugs in security systems. And then, companies and professionals can do that on a much more sustained level. So I think, making the code available on an open source basis is part of it. But we need then also the capacity to scrutinize. And the second part is that in these systems, often the code is not really the critical point, because much of it is developed also at universities, is open source, but the data is to train the models, to run the models. So I think next to open source in code, you really have to think about how to open source the data as well, so that different models can be run, that other people can use the models with the data, but tweak them a little bit to see what other results might come out. And so we really have to expand this notion of openness away from code or beyond code. I mean, obviously you have to keep it in terms of code, but move beyond. Otherwise, there's a big danger that the public is invited to debug systems for the industry that in the end only the industry can use, because only the industry, or let's say the Secret Service or so, has the necessary data to then run these systems at full capacity.
Well, Katerina asked our last question, and she wants to know, is there any way to cheat on algorithms nowadays, given the acceleration of AI and all aspects of algorithmic superiority that you've been discussing?
I wouldn't call it cheating. I mean, if you take the example that Doma mentioned of the kids downrating their school app so that it automatically, algorithmically gets kicked out of the Play Store, I wouldn't call that cheating on the algorithm. I mean, this is the same way that the question whether Facebook was hacked by the Russians. Mm-hmm. They were not really cheating. They were, using the algorithm pretty much as intended. Right? It's too late, and if the system sucks, then it's being kicked out of the Play Store. But it was just never intended for those people to rate it en masse according to their own criteria of what constitutes a good system or not. So I think individually that's really hard, but collectively you can use them in unexpected ways. I mean, there are lots of examples for that. TikTok kids buying up seats for Donald Trump rally was, very famous. Is that cheating? I don't know. It's using the system, but not necessarily as intended.
The possibilities have changed, kind of like the nice thing about this Tesla thing was that kids in Britain could buy up spaces and seats, you don't need to be there actually anymore. That's kind of the nice thing about the internet, that you really can kind of like play outside your own kind of like small bubble.
Yeah, and I think, it really depends what we mean by cheating, because I think many times it's just playing the system to your advantage or to whatever end you have, and I think that's fair game in a way, because it's what is also intended within the system. And I don't know, I just had to think about, there was this story in London where all the school kids at this one school, they all got a Fitbit because they weren't fit enough. You know, the state came to the conclusion that these kids weren't moving enough, so they all got these in a trial. They all got these Fitbits, and they had to take, I don't know, do 10,000 steps or something, and they were being graded on this. And so the kids, of course, took these Fitbits and stuck them on their pets, you know, their dogs and their cats and any other moving, living animals they could find, because, I mean, they were being graded on it, right? So you just find the fastest way to get to your 10,000 steps. And it's kind of like, many times these systems, I think what is really beautiful about many of these systems is that they are designed for one purpose, but you cannot decide what other purposes you kind of also put in there. So they are always ambiguous in the sense that they can be used for different ends. And I think this actually produces many beautiful examples of interaction with these systems that are often very funny and yeah.
Cool. Hey, is this the moment where we need to say bye to each other?
Yeah, I think so. This is all our questions.
Okay.
I thank all of you. It was very interesting, and thanks again to the audience at home.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you for having us. Yeah.
Yes, thanks. And I think the last word has Janusz again from Aksioma. And
Yes.
in the meanwhile, we say bye. Bye.
Thanks. I would like to thank you all, including the online audience, for following us and for contributing to the debate with your questions through the web chat. If you're interested in these topics, in Hyperemployment, Post-Work, Online Labor and Automation, the book just published by Nero Editions and Aksioma, you will find a previous conversation between Mediengruppe Bitnik and Felix Stalder, as well as text by Luciana Parisi, Silvio Russo and Domenico Quaranta. Here instead you can find the online conversation between Silvio Russo and Sebastian Schmig, moderated by Davor Mišković, entitled Laborious Relations. If you like what we do, visit our website, keep an eye on our YouTube and Vimeo channels, and follow us on social media. That's all, folks. Thanks for being with us today. Na svidenje. Thank you.